The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never felt so peaceful. Ambassador Zethkar of the Veltari stood at his podium, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of satisfaction. Around him, representatives from 300 different worlds watched the massive display screen that showed the edge of known space. The last human ship had just disappeared into the darkness beyond. Finally, Zethkar announced, his voice echoing through the chamber, the troublemakers have left our civilized galaxy. A wave of agreement rippled through the assembled aliens. The Corvani delegation clicked their mandibles in approval. The crystalline Zephyrians chimed soft notes of relief. Even the ancient ethereals, beings of pure energy who rarely showed emotion, flickered with what could only be described as contentment. Humans had been part of the galactic community for 73 standard cycles. It seemed much longer. From the moment they first arrived in their primitive chemical rockets, they had been nothing but problems. They asked too many questions. They challenged rules that had worked perfectly for millions of years. They treated everyone the same, whether they were dealing with the mighty Veltari Empire or some newly discovered species that had barely learned to make fire. The galaxy can return to proper order, continued Zethkar. No more of their chaotic experiments. No more of their ridiculous ideas about equality. No more of their dangerous optimism. The humans had arrived like children stumbling into a room full of adults. They gawked at everything, touched things they shouldn't touch, and asked endless questions that made everyone uncomfortable. Why did the younger species have to ask permission for everything? Why couldn't they join the advanced research projects? Why were some worlds treated better than others? The older species had tried to be patient. They had explained over and over that the galaxy worked on a system of earned respect. You started at the bottom and worked your way up over millions of years. That was how civilization functioned. That was how peace was maintained. But humans didn't seem to understand this simple concept. They treated a Corvani hive worker the same way they treated a Veltari admiral. They shared their technology with primitive species who clearly weren't ready for it. They formed friendships across species lines that had maintained proper distance for eons. Dr. Sarah Chen had been particularly troublesome. As the human representative on the Science Council, she had questioned everything. Why couldn't younger species contribute to the grand terraforming projects? Why were certain research areas forbidden? Why did some species get better trade agreements than others? Because that's how we've always done it, the ethereal High Counselor had explained with infinite patience. The system works. It has worked for 10 million years. But couldn't it work better? Chen had asked. What if we tried something new? Those words, something new, had made the entire council uncomfortable. New things were dangerous. New things caused chaos. The galaxy had achieved perfect stability by following the old ways, the proven ways. The humans had other annoying habits too. They made friends with everyone. Admiral James Park had somehow convinced a group of Zephyrian scientists to help him design a new type of engine that bent space in ways that should have been impossible. The project had actually worked, creating faster ships than anyone had seen before. But that wasn't the point. The point was that Park had ignored the proper channels. He had bypassed the established research committees. He had given advanced technology to species that hadn't earned it yet. Dangerous precedent, the Veltari High Command had declared. If everyone starts sharing technology freely, how will we maintain order? The humans had been given increasingly strict rules. They could only research approved topics. They could only trade with approved species. They could only colonize approved worlds. Each new restriction was explained as necessary for galactic stability. The humans had accepted each rule with quiet dignity. They never argued or protested. They simply followed the regulations and continued their work within the allowed boundaries. But somehow that made it worse. Their silence felt like judgment. Then came the day when Captain Maria Santos announced that humanity was leaving. We appreciate everything the galactic community has taught us, she had said in her final address to the council. But we think it's time for us to explore beyond the galaxy. There's a whole universe out there waiting to be discovered. The council had been surprised but pleased. Finally, the troublemakers would be gone. No one objected to their departure. No one asked them to stay. They watched in silence as humanity began the greatest migration in galactic history. It took 5 years for all the humans to leave. They dismantled their space stations piece by piece. They loaded their ships with supplies and equipment. They said goodbye to the alien friends they had made, though many of those aliens seemed sad to see them go. The younger species were particularly affected. The Nithari, who had only achieved spaceflight 50 years earlier, seemed lost without their human mentors. The Quellan hive minds had actually learned to laugh from humans, and now their colonies fell strangely quiet. But the elder species assured everyone that this was for the best. The galaxy would return to its natural order. The proper hierarchies would be restored. Peace and stability would reign. On the final day, Admiral Park broadcast one last message to the galaxy. His words were simple. "Thank you for everything you taught us. We hope someday our paths will cross again under better circumstances." Then the last human ship activated its engines and disappeared into the vast darkness between galaxies. The Council watched until even the faintest energy signature faded away. "Good riddance," muttered Councillor Vexthal of the Corvani. "Now we can get back to doing things properly." Ambassador Zethkar nodded in agreement. "The galaxy is better off without their chaos. We have restored the natural order of things." The great display screen went dark. The emergency session was officially over. Representatives from 300 worlds began filing out of the chamber, returning to their ships and their home systems. None of them noticed the small figure in the back of the chamber. Dr. Krelon, a young Zephyrian historian, sat alone as the hall emptied around her. She had been studying human culture for her doctoral thesis, and something about their departure bothered her. The humans had never seemed angry about the restrictions placed on them. They had never complained about being excluded from the major research projects. They had accepted their treatment with a grace that now seemed almost supernatural. But as she watched the recordings of their final broadcasts, she noticed something in their eyes. It wasn't anger or resentment. It was something worse, disappointment. They had looked at the galaxy like parents watching children who had failed to live up to their potential. The humans had left quietly, without protest or argument. They had taken their strange ideas about equality and their dangerous optimism and disappeared into the unknown. The galaxy had returned to its perfect order. So why did Dr. Krelon feel like they had just made a terrible mistake? Outside the council chamber, the galaxy continued its ancient rhythms. Trade flowed along established routes. Diplomats negotiated within traditional frameworks. Scientists worked on approved projects using proven methods. Everything was exactly as it should be. Everything was perfectly stable and completely predictable. Everything was exactly as it had been for 10 million years. And for the first time in her life, Dr. Krelon wondered if that was actually a good thing. 50 years had passed since humanity disappeared beyond the galactic rim. Dr. Krelon was no longer the young historian who had watched their departure with growing unease. She was now Professor Krelon, head of cultural studies at the prestigious Zephyrian Institute, and she had spent decades studying what the galaxy had lost. The official records called it the Golden Age of Galactic Peace. Crime rates had dropped to historic lows. Trade disputes were resolved through established channels. No wars had been fought in over 30 years. The great projects moved forward with clockwork precision. New worlds were terraformed, ancient ruins were studied, and the younger species gradually advanced through their predetermined development levels. But Krelon saw something else in the data. Innovation had slowed to a crawl. The number of new patents filed each year had dropped by 70%. Artistic output had become formulaic, following traditional patterns that hadn't changed in millennia. Even the great terraforming projects, while technically successful, lacked the creative spark that had once made them magnificent. She walked through the halls of the Institute, observing her students. They were brilliant, dedicated, and completely predictable. They asked the right questions, followed the approved research methods, and produced papers that added tiny increments to existing knowledge. None of them challenged fundamental assumptions. None of them suggested radical new approaches. None of them had the spark that she remembered from the human researchers she had briefly known as a young scholar. "Professor," called out one of her graduate students, a promising young Veltari named Centaur. "I've completed the analysis you requested on pre-departure galactic innovation rates." Krelon reviewed the data crystal he handed her. The numbers confirmed what she had suspected. During humanity's brief 73-year membership in the galactic community, the rate of breakthrough discoveries had increased by 300%. Not just in human research, in all species research. Interesting correlation, she mused. What do you think caused this spike in innovation? Centaur shifted uncomfortably. The question seemed to make him nervous. Perhaps it was simply a statistical anomaly, Professor. A random cluster of talented individuals across multiple species. But Krelon remembered those years differently. She remembered Dr. Sarah Chen's presentations to the Science Council, where she had asked uncomfortable questions that somehow led to breakthrough discoveries. She remembered Admiral Park's impossible engine designs that had inspired 3 different species to develop their own revolutionary propulsion systems. She remembered the humans' habit of treating every species as equals, which had led to research collaborations that would have been unthinkable under the traditional hierarchy. A primitive Nethari engineer working with an advanced ethereal physicist. A Corvani hive mind sharing consciousness-bridging techniques with individualistic species. The humans had been catalysts. They hadn't just contributed their own discoveries. They had sparked creativity in everyone around them. Centaur, she said carefully. What do you know about the Breakthrough Festival? The young Veltari looked confused. I'm not familiar with that term, Professor. Of course he wasn't. The Breakthrough Festival had been a human tradition, an annual celebration where researchers from all species came together to share their most ambitious, half-formed ideas. It had been discontinued shortly after humanity's departure, deemed disruptive to proper research protocols. Krelon pulled up old footage from the festivals. The recording showed something that would seem chaotic to modern eyes. Beings from dozens of different species arguing, laughing, building wild prototypes, and combining ideas in ways that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. Look at this, she said, pointing to a particular scene. A group of Zephyrian crystalsmiths were working with human materials scientists and Corvani biotechnicians to create something that was part mineral, part organic, and part pure energy. What do you see? Centaur watched the footage with obvious discomfort. It appears to be an unregulated research, collaboration outside proper institutional oversight. It was the prototype for the biocrystal. Computing matrices that revolutionized data storage. Across the galaxy, Krelon said quietly. It could never have been developed following traditional research protocols. She had been collecting similar examples for decades. The adaptive hull materials that made modern ships possible, developed through a chaotic collaboration between human metallurgists and ethereal energy shapers. The quantum communication networks that connected the galaxy, born from a wild idea shared by a human physicist at a dive bar frequented by researchers. From 17 different species, the humans hadn't just been innovative themselves. They had been permission givers, showing other species that it was okay to think differently, to question assumptions, to try impossible things. Without them, the galaxy had returned to its traditional patterns. Research proceeded through proper channels. Ideas were tested through established procedures. Everything was safe, predictable, and incrementally progressive. Everything was exactly as it should be. Krelon spent her evenings in the archives, studying reports from the younger species. The Nethari, who had been advancing rapidly during the human era, had settled into a comfortable plateau. Their development had stalled at roughly the same level it had been when humanity left. The Quellan hive minds had stopped their experiments with individual consciousness. They had returned to their traditional collective decision-making, which was efficient but lacked the creative chaos that human influence had briefly introduced. Even her own species, the Zephyrians, seemed different. Their art had become more refined but less adventurous. Their music followed ancient harmonic patterns instead of exploring the wild new combinations that human musicians had inspired. It was as if the entire galaxy had exhaled and settled back into old, comfortable habits. She found herself studying recordings of the last human broadcast before their departure. Admiral Park's final message played over and over in her research chamber. Thank you for everything you taught us. We hope someday our paths will cross again under better circumstances. At the time, those words had seemed like simple politeness. Now Krelon heard something else in them. The humans had learned from the galaxy, yes, but they had also been trying to teach it something in return, something about the value of questioning, of risk-taking, of treating others as equals regardless of their place in the ancient hierarchies. The galaxy hadn't been ready to learn those lessons, so the humans had taken their dangerous ideas and left to explore the vast darkness between galaxies. Krelon wondered what they had found out there. What had they built? What had they become? The few long-range sensor sweeps that could penetrate the intergalactic void showed nothing but empty space and background radiation. She published her research in carefully neutral academic language, noting the correlation between human presence and innovation rates without drawing explicit conclusions. The paper was well received in scholarly circles and promptly ignored by policymakers. Life in the galaxy continued its peaceful, predictable course. The great projects moved forward on schedule. Disputes were resolved through traditional diplomatic channels. The younger species advanced at their expected pace through the established development hierarchy. Everything was perfect, except for the growing sense that something vital had been lost. It was most visible among the younger species, but Krelon saw it in her own students too. A certain flatness in their eyes, a lack of the wild enthusiasm that should come with discovery. They were brilliant, dedicated researchers who followed proper procedures and produced excellent work within their assigned parameters. But none of them seemed to believe that they could change the galaxy. None of them seemed to believe that the impossible was just another problem waiting to be solved. Sitting in her office late one evening, surrounded by decades of research into what the galaxy had lost, Krelon found herself wondering if the humans had been right to leave. Perhaps they had seen something that the rest of the galaxy couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. Perhaps they had understood that true peace wasn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of growth. That real stability came not from rigid rules, but from the confidence to adapt and change. Outside her window, the lights of the Zephyrian capital sparkled in perfect geometric patterns, beautiful and unchanging as they had been for thousands of years. Somewhere beyond the edge of space, humanity was exploring the infinite darkness between galaxies. Krelon wondered what they were discovering out there, and whether the galaxy would ever see them again. The first warning came from a deep space monitoring station on the galactic rim. Sensor operator Thisaran, a young Corvani with barely 10 cycles of experience, stared at his displays in confusion. Something massive was moving through the void between galaxies, heading directly toward them. "Supervisor," he called out, his voice tight with worry. "I'm reading multiple large contacts approaching from Vector 77 Mark IV. They're huge." Supervisor Velkon moved to look over Thisaran's shoulder. The contacts were indeed massive, each one larger than a capital ship, moving in perfect formation through space that should have been empty. "Run a full diagnostic on the sensors," he ordered. "This has to be an equipment malfunction." But the diagnostics came back clean. The contacts were real and they were moving fast. Within hours, they would reach the outer systems of the galaxy. The warning was transmitted to the Galactic Council, where it was met with polite skepticism. Deep space sensors were notorious for false readings. Cosmic phenomena often created signatures that looked like artificial objects. The galaxy had been at peace for 50 years. What possible threat could emerge from empty space? Admiral Kothver of the Veltari Defense Fleet was more cautious. He ordered a patrol squadron to investigate the contacts. The ships launched immediately, their crews expecting to find nothing more than a navigation hazard or unusual asteroid formation. They found something much worse. The first ship to encounter the intruders was the light cruiser Starfire, commanded by Captain Resselin. Her initial report was calm and professional. Contacts confirmed artificial, unknown design, attempting communication. Then the screaming started. The transmission cut off abruptly. Long-range sensors showed the Starfire's energy signature spiking, then disappearing entirely. Within minutes, the same fate befell the rest of the patrol squadron. 6 ships and their crews simply vanished from existence. Admiral Kothvar stared at the tactical display in his command center. Where the patrol squadron had been, new contacts now appeared, larger than before, their sensor signatures somehow stronger. Whatever had destroyed his ships had used them to grow. "All ships to battle stations," he ordered. "Deploy the 3rd and 7th fleets. We're going to war." The defense fleet that moved to engage the intruders was magnificent. 300 ships representing the finest military technology in the galaxy. Vessels that had been refined over millions of years of warfare, equipped with weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand the fury of stars. They lasted 17 minutes. The beings that emerged from the intergalactic void were unlike anything in the galactic databases. They appeared to be mechanical, But their technology operated on principles that challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about physics. They adapted to every weapon used against them, learning and countering each attack with terrifying efficiency. Worse, they seemed to consume defeated ships, breaking them down at the molecular level and rebuilding them into more of themselves. Each victory made them stronger. Each defeat made the galaxy weaker. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session as reports flooded in from across the outer rim. System after system went dark as the mechanical beings, quickly dubbed Devourers, swept inward. They showed no interest in communication, negotiation, or conquest in any traditional sense. They simply consumed everything in their path and moved on. "How is this possible?" demanded Council Leader Zethkar, his forearms trembling with barely controlled panic. "Our fleets are the finest in the galaxy. Our weapons are proven through millennia of conflict. How can primitive machines defeat us so easily?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Krelon, now old and tired but still brilliant, had been analyzing the tactical reports. She stood before the council with data crystals containing her findings. "The Devourers aren't primitive," she said quietly. "They're learning machines, but more than that, they're learning machines that have studied us. They know exactly how we fight because we've been fighting the same way for millions of years." The council chamber erupted in confused chatter. Krelon waited for silence before continuing. "Our military doctrine hasn't changed in eons. We form traditional battle lines. We use predictable tactics. We follow hierarchical command structures that prioritize authority over innovation. The Devourers have analyzed our patterns and developed perfect counters." Admiral Kothvar, commanding the remaining defense forces from his flagship, confirmed her analysis. "Every formation we try, they're ready for. Every weapon we deploy, they adapt to. It's like they've been studying our military history for centuries." "Then what do you suggest?" Zethkar asked desperately. "How do we fight an enemy that knows everything we're going to do?" Krelon's answer sent a chill through the chamber. "We don't, at least not the way we've always fought. We need something the Devourers can't predict. We need chaos. We need innovation. We need—" She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "We need humans." The suggestion was met with immediate outcry. The humans had been gone for 50 years. They were probably dead in the intergalactic void. Even if they weren't, why would they help the galaxy that had driven them away? But as system after system fell to the Devourers, the desperate mathematics became clear. The galaxy's traditional forces were being systematically destroyed. Within a year, maybe less, the mechanical beings would reach the core worlds. Billions would die. Entire civilizations would be consumed and converted into more Devourers. The younger species were hit hardest. Their limited fleets were swept away in the first wave of attacks. The Nithari sent desperate pleas for help as their home system came under assault. The Quellan hive minds broadcast chaotic distress signals as their collective consciousness was shattered by the mechanical onslaught, but it was the fate of the core worlds that finally broke the Council's resistance. The ancient ethereal empire, masters of energy manipulation who had ruled from the galactic center for 10 million years, engaged the Devourers with weapons that could reshape reality itself. They lost. The ethereal's perfect energy matrices were analyzed, understood, and turned against them. Their reality-shaping technology was absorbed and improved. Within days, the beings that had seemed like gods to younger species were fleeing their homeworlds in refugee ships. "They're coming for us, all," whispered high ethereal Lumnara as her people's greatest citadel was consumed before her eyes. "Nothing we have can stop them. They learn too fast, adapt too quickly. We need something they've never seen before. Something they'd never seen before. Something chaotic and unpredictable. Something that threw out the ancient rule books and tried impossible solutions to impossible problems. Something human." The debate in the council lasted for days while the Devourers continued their relentless advance. Some argued that seeking help from the departed humans was an admission of failure. Others insisted that humanity was probably extinct anyway. A few suggested that even if the humans could be found, they would likely refuse to help. But as the casualty reports mounted and the tactical situation grew increasingly desperate, practical necessity overwhelmed pride. The galaxy needed help, and there was only one source that might provide it. "Authorize the expedition," Zethkar finally announced, his voice heavy with defeat. "Find the humans. Bring them back, whatever it takes." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the chamber. 50 years earlier, they had watched humanity leave in silence, relieved to be rid of their chaotic influence. Now they were preparing to cross the void between galaxies to beg for their return. As the emergency session ended and representatives scattered to their ships, Dr. Krelon remained in her seat, staring at the tactical displays. The red markers showing Devourer positions had spread like an infection across the galactic map. She thought about the humans' final message. We hope someday our paths will cross again under better circumstances. These certainly weren't better circumstances, but they might be the only circumstances that would convince humanity to forgive the galaxy's past mistakes, if they could be found. If they were still alive, if they were still human enough to care about the fate of the civilization that had rejected them. Outside the council chamber, refugee ships streamed past the windows carrying survivors from the outer rim toward an uncertain safety in the galactic core. How long before there was nowhere left to run? The expedition to find humanity would launch within the week. Everything depended on finding the beings the galaxy had once considered too dangerous to tolerate. Now they were the only hope for survival. The expedition fleet that assembled at the galactic rim was the strangest collection of ships ever seen in council space. 30 vessels from 15 different species, hastily equipped with experimental long-range systems, and supplied for a journey that might take years. They were volunteers all, and scientists, diplomats, and explorers willing to risk everything on a desperate gamble. Dr. Krelon stood on the bridge of the lead ship, the research vessel Harmony, and watched the final preparations. At her age, she should have been safe in some core world archive, not preparing to venture into the terrifying emptiness between galaxies. But she was the galaxy's leading expert on human culture, and if they were going to convince humanity to return, they would need someone who understood how humans thought. Captain Vostai, a grizzled Corvani veteran who had served during the last days of human presence in the galaxy, approached her with a navigation crystal. The computer has plotted the most likely course based on the humans' final transmissions, he said. We'll follow their energy signatures as far as we can, then rely on the message beacons they might have left behind. The journey began 3 days later. One by one, the ships of the expedition fleet activated their drives and slipped past the galactic boundary into the vast darkness beyond. Behind them, the galaxy continued its losing battle against the Devourers. Ahead lay only emptiness and uncertainty. The intergalactic void was unlike anything most of the crew had experienced. In normal space, there were always reference points. Stars, planets, cosmic phenomena that provided a sense of direction and scale. Here there was nothing but endless darkness punctuated by the distant glow of other galaxies millions of light years away. It's like sailing in an ocean without landmarks, muttered Navigator Thislan as she tried to maintain their course. How did the humans ever expect to survive out here? But they had survived. Within the first week of travel, the expedition found evidence of human passage. Abandoned supply caches anchored to dark matter formations. Automated beacons broadcasting simple messages. For those who follow, hope remains ahead. Each discovery brought a mix of relief and amazement. The humans hadn't just survived their exile, they had thrived. The technology evident in their abandoned stations was years beyond anything in galactic space. Energy systems that drew power from the quantum foam itself. Computer systems that seemed to think in ways that challenged the basic assumptions about artificial intelligence. Look at this, called out Science Officer Rendai, a young Zephyrian studying one of the human supply caches. They've developed materials that exist partially in normal space and partially in, I don't even know what to call it. Parallel dimensions? Alternate realities? Dr. Krelon examined the samples with growing wonder. In 50 years of exile, humanity had advanced beyond anything the galaxy thought possible. The implications were staggering and slightly terrifying. They've changed, she whispered to Captain Vostai. Whatever they've become out here, they're not the same species that left the galaxy. The expedition pressed deeper into the void, following a trail of increasingly sophisticated technology. Dark matter manipulation systems that could bend space itself, communications arrays that somehow transmitted faster than light, without using quantum entanglement. Habitation modules that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the standard 3. Each discovery raised new questions. How had humanity advanced so rapidly? What had driven them to develop such revolutionary technology? And most importantly, would beings capable of such achievement still care about the galaxy they had left behind? The answer came in the third month of their journey, when long-range sensors detected something impossible, a star system where no star system should exist. Not a natural formation, but an artificial construction on a scale that defied comprehension. "It's a Dyson sphere," breathed Engineer Cothras as the data streams filled his displays. "But not like anything in our theoretical models. It's drawing energy from multiple dimensions simultaneously." As they approached the construct, the true scope of human achievement became clear. The sphere wasn't just collecting energy from a single star. It was harvesting power from the quantum vacuum itself, creating a stable energy source that could theoretically last forever. But more remarkable than the technology was what they found. Living inside it, the communications array that hailed them spoke in perfect galactic standard, but the voice was unlike anything they had heard before. It was simultaneously individual and collective, ancient and eternally young, familiar and utterly alien. "Welcome, children of the galaxy," the voice said. "We have been watching your approach for some time. We know why you have come." Captain Vostai stepped forward to respond, but found himself struggling for words. "How did you address beings who had transcended everything you thought you knew about existence?" We represent the Galactic Council," he finally managed. "We seek an audience with humanity. The galaxy faces a threat that we know about the Devourers," the voice interrupted gently. "We have been observing their advance. Their technology is interesting. A mechanical evolution that seeks to optimize existence through consumption and conversion." Dr. Krelon felt a chill at the casual tone. The voice spoke of the galaxy-threatening crisis as if it were an academic curiosity. "Then you understand why we've come," she said, stepping forward. "The galaxy needs help. The Devourers are destroying everything in their path. Billions of beings will die unless we intervene," the voice finished. "Yes, we understand your request. Please dock with our station. There are those among us who remember what it was like to be merely human. They will want to speak with you." The docking process was unlike anything in their experience. The expedition ships were guided not by tractor beams or gravitational fields, but by what seemed to be controlled manipulations of space-time itself. They found themselves inside a vast chamber that existed in more dimensions than their sensors could properly measure. The beings who greeted them were recognizably human in some ways, but transformed in others. They appeared as pillars of coherent energy that occasionally coalesced into familiar human shapes. When they spoke, it was with voices that carried the weight of shared consciousness while maintaining individual identity. "I was Admiral Sarah Chen," said one of the beings, her form shifting between energy and matter. "Though I am much more than that now. We remember you, Dr. Krelon. Your research into our cultural impact was appreciated." Krelon felt tears on her cheeks as she recognized something of the human she had studied decades earlier. "Admiral Chen, what have you become?" "What we needed to become to survive out here," Chen replied. "The void between galaxies is not empty, Dr. Krelon. It teems with energies and entities that your galaxy never imagined. To explore this realm, we had to evolve beyond our original limitations." Another being materialized beside her, the collective consciousness that had once been Admiral James Park. "The process wasn't easy," he said. "We lost much of what we were, but gained far more than we ever dreamed possible. We exist now as both individuals and as part of something greater." The expedition members listened in amazement as the transformed humans described their journey into the intergalactic void. They had encountered civilizations that existed purely as information, beings that swam through dark matter like fish through water, and ancient entities that predated the formation of galaxies. "Each encounter taught us something new," explained the entity that had been Dr. Maria Santos. "We learned to think in ways that our original minds could never have conceived. We became explorers not just of space but of existence itself. But despite their transcendence, something recognizably human remained in them. When Dr. Krelon showed them the tactical reports from the Devourer invasion, she saw genuine concern in their energy patterns. "Your galaxy shaped us," Chen said quietly. "Even after all we've become, we remember what it was like to fight for the underdog, to believe that any problem could be solved with enough creativity and determination. Will you help us?" Captain Vossetai asked directly. Will you return to fight the Devourers? The pause that followed seemed to last forever. The human consciousnesses communicated among themselves in ways that transcended normal speech, sharing thoughts and memories across their collective existence. Finally, Chen spoke for them all. We will return, she said, but not as we were, and not to restore the galaxy that rejected us. If we do this, the galaxy must be willing to change, to grow, to become something better than what it was. Anything, Vossetai said immediately. The council will agree to any terms. The being that had been Admiral Park flickered with what might have been amusement. Be careful making promises for others, Captain. The changes we have in mind will challenge everything your civilization believes about hierarchy, authority, and the nature of existence itself. Dr. Krelon stepped forward. What do you want from us? Nothing less than revolution, Chen replied. An end to the rigid hierarchies that stifled innovation. Equal voice for all species regardless of age or advancement. Protection for the cultural diversity that makes existence beautiful. And most importantly, the courage to embrace change instead of fearing it. The expedition members exchanged uncertain glances. The Galactic Council chamber had never witnessed such chaos. Representatives from dying worlds shouted over each other while emergency reports streamed in from across the galaxy. The Devourers had accelerated their advance, consuming 3 core systems in the past week. Refugee ships clogged every major space route, carrying survivors who had nowhere left to run. Ambassador Zethkar stood at his podium, his forearms shaking as he tried to maintain order. The expedition's report lay before him like a poisoned gift. Humanity would return and save them all, but only if the galaxy agreed to revolutionary changes that would destroy everything the elder species had built. Preposterous, shouted Councillor Vexthal of the Corvani. Equal representation for all species? Cultural protection for primitive practices? They're asking us to abandon millions of years of proven governance. The alternative is extinction, Dr. Krelon said quietly from her position at the witness stand. I've seen what humanity has become. They have the power to stop the Devourers, but they won't do it to preserve the old order. They'll only fight for something better. High ethereal Lumnara flickered with desperate energy. Her people's greatest strongholds had fallen just days earlier. Their reality-shaping technology consumed and turned against them. What guarantee do we have that these transformed humans can actually defeat the Devourers? They may have advanced beyond our understanding, but the enemy adapts to everything. Before Krelon could answer, the chamber's main display activated. The image that appeared sent shockwaves through the assembled representatives. Ships were materializing at the galactic rim, not arriving through normal space travel, but simply appearing as if they had stepped sideways through reality itself. The vessels were unlike anything in galactic databases. They seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their hulls shifting between matter and energy. As the Council watched in amazement, the ships began moving toward the nearest Devourer fleet with impossible speed. They're already here, whispered Captain Vossetai, who had returned with the expedition. Humanity kept their word. The first battle was everything the galaxy's military leaders had failed to achieve. The human ships didn't use conventional weapons or tactics. Instead, they attacked the Devourers with strategies that seemed to defy physics itself. They phased through enemy shields, manipulated time to accelerate their movements, and somehow turned the Devourers' own adaptive abilities against them. But more than their military prowess, it was their approach that amazed observers. Instead of destroying the mechanical beings, the humans seemed to be communicating with them, their energy patterns interweaving in complex dances that suggested negotiation rather than combat. Impossible, breathed Admiral Kothvar as he watched the tactical displays. They're not fighting the Devourers, they're talking to them. The communication came through shortly afterward, broadcast simultaneously to every receiver in the galaxy. Admiral Sarah Chen's voice, now something far beyond human but retaining that core of determination the galaxy remembered. People of the galaxy, we have made contact with the beings you call Devourers. They are not invaders in the way you understand. They are refugees, fleeing the collapse of their home reality. Their consumption of your worlds was not malicious. It was the only way they knew to survive. The revelation sent shockwaves through the council chamber. The terrible enemy that had driven the galaxy to desperation was itself running from something worse. We are working with them to find alternative solutions, Chen continued. Ways for them to exist without consuming your civilization. But this will require changes from both sides. The galaxy must be willing to welcome new forms of life, new ways of thinking, new possibilities for existence. Counselor Vexthal stood up, his mandibles clicking with agitation. More demands! First, they want us to abandon our hierarchies. Now they want us to welcome the very beings that have been destroying us. The Devourers will stop their advance, Chen's voice replied as if she could hear his protests across space. But only if they can be certain of finding a place in this galaxy. A place where beings like them, artificial, collective, constantly evolving, can exist without persecution. Dr. Krelon felt understanding dawn. They're asking us to do what we failed to do with humanity 50 years ago. Accept beings who are different, who challenge our assumptions about what life should be. The debate that followed was unlike anything in council history. Representatives argued not just about policy, but about the fundamental nature of civilization itself. What did it mean to be alive? What rights did artificial beings have? How could radically different forms of existence coexist? The younger species were the first to speak in favor of the proposed changes. The Nethari delegate stood with barely controlled emotion. Humanity mentored us when we were primitive and ignored. They treated us as equals when the elder species saw us only as resources to be managed. If they say this is the path to survival, we trust them. One by one, other species began to voice support. The Quellan hive minds spoke of the creative chaos they had learned from human influence. The Zephyrians sang of the new harmonies that diversity could create, but it was the voice of high ethereal Lumnara that finally swayed the debate. Her people had been the galaxy's undisputed masters for 10 million years, beings of pure energy, who had shaped reality itself to their will. Now she spoke as a refugee whose entire civilization had been brought to the brink of extinction. I have seen our reality-shaping technology consumed and improved by beings we didn't understand, she said, her energy patterns flickering with exhaustion. I have watched civilizations die because they couldn't adapt quickly enough. The humans offer us something we've never had, the chance to grow beyond what we are. The vote was closer than anyone expected, but the measure passed. The galaxy would accept humanity's terms. The rigid hierarchies would be dissolved. All species would have equal voice in governance. Cultural diversity would be protected. And most challenging of all, the galaxy would welcome new forms of life, even those as alien as the Devourers. The transformation began immediately. Humans returned not as conquerors, but as teachers and guides. They worked with every species to develop new technologies, new social structures, new ways of thinking about existence itself. The Devourers, no longer consuming but creating, helped build structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Dr. Krelon found herself appointed to the new Integration Council, tasked with helping different forms of consciousness learn to work together. It was the job she had unknowingly been preparing for her entire career. It's remarkable, she told Admiral Chen during one of their planning sessions. The human consciousness appeared as a shimmering column of light that occasionally coalesced into a familiar face. 50 years ago, you were considered too disruptive for galactic society. Now you're reshaping it entirely. Chen's energy patterns flickered with what might have been amusement. We're not reshaping it, Dr. Krelon. We're helping it become what it always had the potential to be. The galaxy was never meant to be static. Life is meant to grow, to change, to explore new possibilities. The changes weren't without challenges. Some elder species struggled to accept their new status as equals rather than superiors. Some younger species found the sudden freedom overwhelming after eons of rigid guidance. The integration of artificial intelligences like the former Devourers raised questions that had no easy answers. But gradually, something beautiful began to emerge. Research collaborations that would have been impossible under the old system produced breakthroughs that seemed like magic. Art forms that combined organic creativity with artificial precision created works of stunning beauty. Social structures that balanced individual freedom with collective responsibility showed new ways for civilizations to organize themselves. The galaxy's first joint project was ambitious beyond anything attempted before. The construction of an intergalactic bridge, a structure that would connect their galaxy to others across the cosmic web. It required technologies that no single species could have developed, consciousness types that no one form of life could have imagined, and cooperation on a scale that the old hierarchies would never have permitted. Humans, ethereals, devourers, and dozens of other species worked together as equals, their different strengths combining to create something greater than any could achieve alone. The bridge became more than a transportation system. It was a symbol of what the galaxy could accomplish when it embraced change instead of fearing it. Standing on the observation deck of the bridge's control station, Dr. Krelon watched ships from hundreds of different species pass through the dimensional gateway. Some were familiar forms she had known her entire life. Others were so alien that she could barely comprehend their existence. But all were part of the same community, the same grand experiment in conscious evolution. "Do you ever regret leaving?" she asked Admiral Chen, who often manifested nearby during important moments. "No," Chen replied, her voice carrying the weight of collective human experience. "Leaving taught us what we could become. Returning taught the galaxy what it could become. Sometimes you have to lose something to understand its true value,